We continue our study of Daniel, and we are in Daniel 7. Now, you wonder, okay, last week we finished Daniel 4, and now we're skipping to Daniel 7. Why is that? Well, if you will notice in Daniel 7:1, it says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon." You turn over to chapter 8, verse 1, and it says, "In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar." But then you turn back to chapter 5, and it says, "Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. That is in his last year." Obviously, this is not in chronological order. Chronological order would have chapter 7 coming after chapter 4, chapter 8 after chapter 7, and chapter 5 after chapter 8. Now, have I got you completely confused? Well, it's not really that confusing. As we've mentioned before, there is a section of Daniel that's written in Aramaic from chapter 2, about the mid part of chapter 2, down to the end of chapter 7. And as Rex Turner points out in his commentary, I think with good reason, he says that there was a desire to keep the Aramaic section of Daniel as one unit together. And so, chronologically, even though it's not in order, still, as far as how the book is written, it is where it ought to be. So, if we're going to go chronologically, as, by the way, Brother Turner does in his commentary, you should know by now that I follow Brother Turner's lead on this. He goes from chapter 4 to chapter 7. And that's what we're going to do. And in fact, I want to read to you a section out of Brother Turner's commentary, giving the reason why this is the case. He says, "The very mention of Belshazzar the king, as per chapter 7, meant that years had intervened between the events recorded in chapters 1 through 4 and those events recorded in chapters 7, 8, and 5. Nebuchadnezzar had died, and his son Evil-Merodach, or Amel-Marduk, as he is known, had ascended the throne. In turn, he brought Jehoiachin, the last king of Judah, or the next to last king of Judah, out of prison and set his throne above the throne of the other kings of Babylon. As has already been observed," he says, he quotes from Jeremiah 52:31 through 34. "It came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, and the 25th day of the month, that Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and brought him forth out of prison. And he spake kindly to him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings that were with him in Babylon, and changed his prison garments. And Jehoiachin did eat bread before him continually all the days of his life. And for his allowance there was a continual allowance given him by the king of Babylon, every day a portion until the day of his death, all the days of his life." He then quotes from Josephus concerning Nebuchadnezzar's death. "Nebuchadnezzar, after he had begun to build the aforementioned wall, fell sick, and departed this life when he had reigned 43 years, whereupon his son Evil-Merodach obtained the kingdom. He governed public affairs after an illegal and impure manner," and goes on to describe more about what took place following. And then Brother Turner writes this: "The succession of the kings of Babylon, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar, would be as follows. Nebuchadnezzar, 43 years. Evil-Merodach, or Amel-Marduk, 2 years. Neriglissar, 4 years. Laborasarkad, 1 year. And Nabonidus, 16 years. A total period of 66 years. So after the death of Nebuchadnezzar, until this point in chapter 7, there's been about 20 to 23 years that have intervened. Gives you sort of a time reference. About 20 to 23 years after the death of Nebuchadnezzar is where we find the events that are begun to be described in chapter 7. And so, here in chapter 7, verse 1, Daniel says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon." And here the liberals rise with point of order. Wait just a moment. This is another example of the many historical inaccuracies of Daniel, they would say. Now, Belshazzar was a co-regent king with his father Nabonidus, but Daniel was not in the least inaccurate when he referred to Belshazzar as king, because he was a co-regent regent. Nabonidus entrusted the rule of Babylon into his son's hands. He moved to Haran and assisted in the restoration of the temple of the moon god Sin. He took up residence in Edom and was thus away from Babylon for some 10 years. The first year of Belshazzar then would have been the third year of the reign of his father Nabonidus. So in other words, what Nabonidus was doing is he was entrusting the kingdom to his son. In essence, setting him up as king, while he was taking care of business away from the capital. And so when Daniel says in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, he is completely accurate. Then he says Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum the matters. He was having a dream, but it was not just an ordinary dream. It was a God-given vision. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. The four winds of heaven. This would indicate great peoples, populations. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Where do we find in the New Testament the word beast mentioned? Revelation, oh yes. Revelation talks about a land beast and a sea beast. And the beast of Revelation 13 has a number, like a man, 666. Well, now, does this have any connection with that? I think it does. But here we find four beasts, four great beasts. These would be rulers or great powers, as we're going to see. And they were diverse one from another, or they came one after another in consecutive order. Now these beasts, I will go ahead and tip my hand as to what I believe these beasts represent. These beasts represent Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. As we've already seen in Daniel 2. The vision that Nebuchadnezzar had of the great image. The same kind of sequence is given here in Daniel's vision that he saw. He says in verse 4, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man. And a man's heart was given to it. Now, does that sound familiar? Does that sound similar to what had happened to Nebuchadnezzar that we've already seen described? Nebuchadnezzar was brought down by God because he refused to give God the glory. He was given, of course, a spirit like an animal, or he was eating grass like an animal and behaving like an animal for a period of time. And so this would indicate that this would represent Babylon in the person of Nebuchadnezzar. And he says a man's heart was given to it. At this point, Babylon was already in decline when Daniel had this vision. The glory days of Babylon had already been seen under Nebuchadnezzar. And in the consecutive rulers that came afterward, Babylon began to go down instead of advance forward. And behold another beast, verse 5, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. So we've got a bear. The bear is representative of Russia. That means that Russia, no, wait a minute. Isn't that what you hear a lot of our religious friends say? Oh, when you see a bear, that's got to be the Soviet Union. Remember back in the 70s during the heyday of the Soviet Union? It's got to be the Soviet Union. Or now Russia. You know, everybody's talking Russia, Russia, Russia. Just like Marsha, Marsha, Marsha on the Brady Bunch. Russia, Russia, Russia. Well, Russia is represented by a bear, no doubt. And there's no question that symbolism is strong. But this is not talking about Russia. Remember, these beasts come one right after another. So the one that comes after Babylon is Persia. the Persian Empire would rise up. Medo-Persia was a strong empire, as we're going to be seeing, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. 3 ribs stuck in its teeth. Now, what does that represent? Commentators are divided over this. Scholars are divided. But I tend, surprise, surprise, to go along with Rex Turner and those that agree with him when they say that this would represent Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt, the 3 great powers that Persia conquered in order to consolidate her kingdom. Persia was a great world empire when it rose up to its zenith of power. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. Get that picture in your mind. A leopard with 4 wings like a bird. Now, what in this world does that represent? Well, the next great world power after Persia is Greece, is it not? If you know anything about the rapid rise of Greece under Alexander the Great, you know that it was indeed a quick rise to world prominence. Alexander the Great died at the age of 33, and within a period of just a few years before his death, he had conquered the known world all the way from the Mediterranean Sea to the very gates of India itself, even up into what we now know as part of Russia, or Azerbaijan, if you want to be specific about it, the former Soviet Union. He was a world conqueror on a grand scale, and Greece's power came to it quickly. And so, with this leopard, a very powerful predatory animal with wings like an eagle, this would very much fit the profile of the Greece Empire. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given unto it. 4 heads? What does that represent? Quite possibly the divisions of the empire at the very zenith of Alexander the Great's conquering. He would die, and because of his death, the empire was divided basically into 4 parts among his generals. And that led, of course, to the dissolution of the empire completely and the rise of Rome's prominence. So you've got this symbolism here. Of course, Daniel doesn't know all of this. He's just seeing this vision, and he's describing it as it was given to him. After this, verse 7, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse or different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, we go in sequence. The first beast representing Babylon. Second beast representing Persia. Third beast representing Greece. This 4th beast would then represent Rome. Rome is described as this dreadful, terrible, strong 4th beast, which had great iron teeth, which devoured and brake in pieces, stamped the residue of the feet, and it had 10 horns. What does the 10 horns represent? Who do the 10 horns represent? Well, when you look at what Brother Turner writes and what Brother Haley writes, they have a difference of opinion over how you begin the sequence of those 10 horns. They both agree that these 10 horns represent 10 rulers of Rome, or 10 kings, Caesars. But where do you start with the rulers? That's the question. It's an interesting question. I just think it's sufficient to say that this represents 10 Caesars of Rome. And we'll leave it at that for the time being until we get to verse 8, which we are now at verse 8. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. Now this little horn is significant. Who does this little horn represent? Brother Turner believed that this represents Vespasian. The reason why he says is because the three of the first horns that were plucked up by the roots, he would say that's Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, who all reigned for a total of about 1.5 years. And Vespasian was called back from Jerusalem to Rome to take care of this chaos that was going on in the city. He quelled the rebellion and then took control and reigned for about 15 years approximately until his death. He claimed, or Brother Turner claims, that Vespasian is the one who is the little horn. There are others, like Brother Haley, who say that we really can't specify who this is. It's just sufficient for us to say it's Rome and just leave it at that, which there's something to be said for that kind of position. But still, others have said that this little horn represents Domitian, the beast, I believe, of Revelation. Whatever this beast represents, or this little horn represents, it has to do with the Roman Empire. It doesn't have to do with some future president or some future ruler or some future world power that's going to rise up at the end of time in some battle of Armageddon, as we would have believed by the premillennialists. It has nothing to do with what Daniel's talking about here. The premillennialists want to connect Daniel with their interpretation of the last things, but that has nothing to do with it. So verse 9, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days, or one that was Ancient of Days, did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. Now what is he describing? He's describing the Ancient of Days. He's pure. He is has great wisdom. He also has anger and wrath as a part of this. Verse 10, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Who are the thousands and 10,000 times 10,000? Most likely he's describing the angelic host that is there before the Ancient of Days. He then says the judgment was set. Notice please the wording of that phrase. The judgment was set. It's not that the judgment is taking place. Very important. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Now, where do we find the books were opened in the New Testament? Revelation 20, verses 11 through 15. The books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by the things written out of the books according to their works. So this right here in Revelation 7 sets the scene for what you will see in Revelation 20, if you look at it from that vantage point. The judgment, if you want to say the great judgment, the final judgment, has not yet taken place. So what judgment is he speaking of? Look at verse 11. I beheld them because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. He's saying that this great fourth beast is going to be destroyed. He's going to be punished. So this judgment that he's referring to, the judgment was set in verse 10 in context is talking about Rome. This great beast that would rise up and do much damage, he's going to be taken out of the way. He's going to be taken out of the way by the Ancient of Days. Verse 12. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. The provinces continued for a time after Rome's judgment. And yet there was a reason for them having their dominion taken away. These different empires contributed different things to world civilization. And even so, Rome contributed the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that would in part set the stage for Christ's coming. Greece would provide the universal language, which would be used throughout the Roman Empire in the first century. Then you've got Babylon, of course, and Persia contributing law and order and the things of that nature. So you've got all these different attributes that contributes to the time when the fullness of time would come, when Christ would come and be born and then live and then be crucified and resurrected. All these different empires would contribute its different accomplishments to set the stage for Christ to come on the scene. And now verses 13 and 14. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. What is this representing? What is this talking about? We'll look at it carefully. He says, what does he see? He says he's in the night visions. He sees one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. Where do we find the Son of Man in the clouds? Acts chapter 1. When he's taken away from the apostles up into the sky in a great cloud. Acts 1, 9 through 11, and the apostles are watching him as he goes up, and two angels appear and say, this same Jesus, as you saw him go up, in the same manner shall come back. So this talking here in Daniel 7, 13 and 14 about the ascension of Jesus. When Jesus ascended, what happened? And that's what he's foretelling here. That's what he's prophesying concerning. Daniel 7, 13 and 14. Notice also something else. Psalms chapter 24 is another passage that I think is very intriguing when you talk about the ascension of Jesus back to the Father. Psalm 24 verses 7 through 10. Notice what David writes. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lift up ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Selah. So what is this describing? It's describing when the King of glory, Christ, would come to the very gates of heaven, escorted by angels, and the angels are announcing His coming, and the angels from within are asking, who is this? It's a great scene that's described there. So when He talks about the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, He's coming in the clouds that He ascended up into heaven from. And so it says, they came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought Him near before Him. Who are the they there? Angelic hosts. The angelic hosts escort the Son of Man. What happens in verse 14 as a result? And there was given Him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve Him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and His kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Now let's think about this for a moment. After Jesus was resurrected from the dead, He appeared, of course, to all of His apostles. And there He was with them for 40 days. on the earth. And then he told them, wait or tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you be endued with power from on high. So at the end of that 40-day period, he ascends back to the Father. And so the apostles go to Jerusalem and they wait for 10 days. Now, have you ever wondered why they waited? Why Jesus told them to wait for 10 days before anything happened? Well, I believe it's not that difficult to understand. If you look at here, what's being described, the Son of Man coming before the Ancient of Days, and at that point there would be given him power or dominion, glory, and a kingdom. The kingdom would be given to him at that point. What does that mean? Jesus has been away from heaven for 33 years, approximately. He's been away from heaven for 33 years. He had prayed to the Father in John 17, now Father, glorify me with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. He desired to have that glory once again that he had enjoyed while he was in heaven. He longed to be back in heaven where he rightfully belonged, at the right hand of God. And now he's coming back to heaven. The King of Kings, the Son of Man, is coming to receive his kingdom. Do you not think that there would be a celebration? A celebration among the angelic hosts for the returning Son of Man? Do you not think that there would be a coronation period? Some of you might remember when Queen Elizabeth was coronated Queen of England. It looks like she's going to serve until she dies, whenever that is down the road. She's announced or had it leaked out that she's going to keep on serving as Queen until she passes away. Some of you remember when she was coronated. Do you remember the coronation that took place in Britain for about a week? They celebrate this thing for a long period of time. It's a major deal. Think about the King of Kings coming back to heaven and the celebration that would ensue. They had to have time to do that. And so when Jesus tells them to wait for 10 days in the city, or wait until the city of Jerusalem, they wait for 10 days until Pentecost. That is, of course, to fulfill prophecy, obviously, so the kingdom could be established. But that would give time for the host of heaven to celebrate and for them to coronate Jesus. And so when the gospel was preached in Acts chapter 2, when 3,000 souls obeyed the truth and were added by the Lord to the church, they were being added by the Lord to the kingdom, which was established. The earthly manifestation of the kingdom today is the church. There is, of course, the kingdom of heaven, which is spoken of quite often by Jesus and the New Testament writers, talking about heaven itself. But there's also the earthly manifestation of the kingdom, which is the church, which was foretold in Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And here in Daniel 7, 13 and 14, there will be given him a kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. The kingdom is not something that's yet to be established at the end of time. Premillennialists have it all wrong. The kingdom is already here, and we can be a part of it. Jesus told the apostles, he told Peter and then all the apostles, I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. The kingdom of heaven is not just the kingdom that is in heaven, but it's the kingdom that is on earth. That is the church. It is the kingdom that will be delivered back to God, 1 Corinthians 15 tells us, at the end of time. One had that debate with Preston about the 80-70 doctrine. He tried to make fun of the idea that Jesus would deliver the kingdom back up to the Father. You have Jesus abdicating his throne, he said. No, you've got what Paul says through inspiration of the Holy Spirit. That at the end of time, he will deliver up the kingdom to God, the Father, that God may be all in all. The kingdom will be delivered to the Father at the end of time. The kingdom of God on earth is the church. And that is what's being described here, that is being given to the Son of Man. And so after he sees all of this in this vision, verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. Daniel's just a man. Daniel's a mere man. And this is an overwhelming thing for a man at his age to experience. He's not a young man anymore, as we're going to see. About 20 years have passed since his friend Nebuchadnezzar had died. And now he's seen this great vision. Verse 16, I came near unto one of them that stood by. This is again still in this dream. One of them that stood by would be an angelic being. And asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts which are four kings, which shall rise out of the earth. So Daniel tells us that these are 4 kings. As we've already seen, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. How would they possess the kingdom? Not by force. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. For if my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I might not be delivered to the Jews. His kingdom is not an earthly conquering kingdom, which has armies and weapons. It is a spiritual force. The church of our Lord, the kingdom of our God, would conquer the kingdoms by truth. The weapons of our warfare are spiritual, not carnal, to the pulling down of strongholds, everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of Christ. That's the warfare we're fighting. That's the battle that we're engaged in. And that is what he's talking about. Verse 19, then I would know the truth of the 4th beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron as nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before him 3 fell. Even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. He wanted to know, what does this represent? What does this mean? I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Now, the 80-70 advocates would say, you see, that's when Jerusalem would fall, and the saints would possess the Jewish kingdom. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about this 4th kingdom, Rome. He's not talking about the Jewish kingdom. If you want to say Jewish, it would be not a kingdom in the 1st century. He's not talking about the Jewish religion. He's talking about the kingdom, the 4th kingdom, Rome itself. This war with the saints is war with Christians who are saints. Persecution. Rome would persecute the church. And judgment then would be given against Rome, according here to verse 22. Judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came, it would come, in other words, the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. After the great struggle and the great persecution that Rome waged against the saints, eventually the church would overcome all of that. Thus he said, verse 23, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms. How would Rome be diverse or different from all these other kingdoms? Rome was a republic originally. It was a republic until the Caesars began to rise and began to supplant the republic. It was a republic in name by the time you come down to the end of the 1st century, but still, Rome was different in that it was a republic set up. And shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. Rome would have complete control over all the known world. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them. Notice that. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. I believe that's talking about Domitian. Domitian would be the beast of Revelation 13, and I believe he is that beast or that horn that would rise after the 10 horns. He would be different in every way from the rest. Verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, persecution, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. Where do you see time times dividing of time, time times and half a time, 3.5? Revelation, right? That's a figure of speech to indicate an intense period of persecution that has a beginning point and an ending point. Always a better day to follow. Verse 26, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. From the time of Domitian until the time that the empire finally completely fell, Rome, even though it ostensibly still had power, it would begin to be plagued by outside forces invading it from without, from internal corruption, from different disasters, natural disasters that would weaken the empire from within. And so it would continue to decline until the complete fall of it. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. From the time the kingdom of the Lord was established in Acts chapter 2 until now, the kingdom of our Lord, the church, has been with us, present. It has never been destroyed, and it never will be destroyed. That was the promise that God made in Daniel 2, and that's the promise that's repeated here, and that is the reality of the matter. Verse 28, hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me. But I kept the matter in my heart. At the point that Daniel recounts this, in the narrative, he is now about 63 years old. He's no longer that 18 to 21-year-old boy that came out of Israel or Judah, along with his 3 friends who have long since passed away. He's no longer that young, wide-eyed man that came into Babylon as a slave and then as a eunuch serving in the court of a pagan king. He is an experienced government official who has never given up on his God, who's been faithful to God from the first until this present time. And he knows he's got some more things ahead of him, but just what, he is not sure. Daniel is a unique man in a unique position for a unique purpose. And that purpose is yet to be completely fulfilled at this point, because he's got a lot more to go through, as we all know. There's more to this story than what you've seen here. As we're going to go through the rest of it, you will see that he's going to serve ostensibly one ruler, even though it's just for one night. And then he's going to serve yet another ruler. So he's going to serve a total of about 3 or 4 rulers. He's already served Babylon. He's going to be serving in Persia, 2 different world empires. Because the leadership of these empires see something in Daniel that's unique. They see a man that will serve faithfully, that's never going to give up on his principles, never going to turn away from his principles and his beliefs, but one that will do his job and do it well. And that's what Daniel was. I've referred to Talleyrand before, the great French diplomat. Talleyrand was a Machiavellian type of diplomat in the sense that he was willing to do anything to survive. But Talleyrand was a survivor. He was present in the court of King Louis the 14th, I believe, or maybe the Louis the 15th. And then in the French Revolution, when it happened and overthrew the king and the queen, he survived and was in the government, we should say, of the revolution. And then after the revolutionary period ended, he was still there in France serving Napoleon. He was present all through that time. Daniel was a survivor in the very best way. He was a man that knew how to serve under several different rulers and different empires. Anyway, we're going to continue our study next week with Daniel chapter 8.